Okay, so when we last left our hero, we had finished phase 2. And so here we are on phase 3. It's been a month now, and so I want to give a review of what I've done with phase 3, 4, and 5. So I did stop using the AWS secrets, and I'll show you how I got away from that and still made it secure. Also did the registration process, put the SMS capability code in. At the last time we looked at it, that code was not enabled. And I did do the Twilio sign up, did the A2P registration, and actually they charged me $21. And that's still not active actually after a month. So I'm still working with their support team to try to get that going. The main problem, I think, is that I don't actually have a working website. So they can't kind of verify that I'm going to do it right. But I'm trying to convince them that it will be. So we'll keep giving that a try. So this I'm not going to review because it's not really done. I'll put that into a later video. And with the SMS code too. I'll skip that till later. So we'll take a look at registration and how I stopped using secrets for phase 3. And then we'll get into list management stuff for phase 4. That's probably enough for this video, and then we'll do more for like a phase 4 part 2 and phase 5. So what was changed is so here on startup, instead of how it used to be, which we can look at the code in whatever the previous video was that covered this, instead of actually looking at secrets, there's a SQL query that goes in and pulls in anything from the Z config table. And so I'm now putting in all the secrets in there. And so assuming that my database is secure, then everything else should be secure as well. So I'm setting each of there's like a node field of that table. Let's pull up the database design for that. Here it is. The Z config table has a node, a key, and a value. Okay. So the node, this tells you where in the structure, the structure up here, config, blah, 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 where in that structure that node should be, the data should be put in, what is the key that goes into that structure, and what's the value. And then also, I'm still pulling in information from the environment as necessary, and then checking to see, do I have enough information to actually start? I think there's a lot of defaults, so usually the answer is yes. But you see a different file in here that wasn't there before, and that's config DB. And that's because in order to be reading from the database, I have to have a database connection. So I have to have previously connected a database. So I'm doing it through, so basically this is like a shortened version. It's just pulling things in from the environment to connect to the database. That's all I really have. I don't have anything else. It's just like one little section of the previous config that's kind of hard coded in a sense. It uses the same sort of process. It's just that it's not centralized in that config file. It's a config DB instead. So I no longer have to pull from the secrets, and it's still secure because everything is still in the database, which is secure through the environment variables. Okay, next topic is the registration process. So let's start this going here. Okay, service is starting up. I'm using version 0.5, and get this started over here. Okay, so when you come to the login screen, if you want to look at registration, you say, give it a try. That's the same thing as registration. I can log in here because I do have a login, but the object here is to show you what the registration process looks like. So here's a place to put in name, email, phone number, And if you choose to put in a phone number, then you'd have to say, yes, by providing this phone number, I agree to receive text messages from Family Santa. That's the the legal requirement. I have to say, hey, this is a requirement. Now, if I just put an email, it won't ask me to do that. And so there's logic in here. When you click on register, if there's a phone number, it'll ask you to make sure you've checked that box. I'll put in Mr. Tim Demo. And by putting an email, notice how the phone number goes away. The registration and actually the login process is now geared to make it so you're only logging in as one or the other. Mainly because when I do the registration process, I'm actually sending out a verification message. And there isn't a convenient way of sending out two verification messages and making sure both of them get checked. So I'm just going to do one or the other, and you can go back in later and choose a different one. So for this demo, I'll use email, especially since the SMS isn't actually working yet. So, and now I'm not checking that box. Let's see, does it work? Okay, it does. Now, if you look over here and what actually happened, mail sent to that address, and registration sent back a 201, meaning created. But I have 15 minutes. There's actually a timeout process here. And I'll go over to my email, which is on another screen. So here's the email that was sent to me. It has a link at the bottom here. This won't work because the app is not actually working at that address yet. But it does give me the number I need. So if I went into reset and then my email, it actually reads the email off the page. But let's just go to reset from here. Resets.htm. Now again, like I said, if the email was in here, it would notice that and fill that in. And I get to pick a new password. The verification code from the email is here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't put in a special character. Yeah, I forgot I added that in here. I'll show you the code for that. You're right. There's no uppercase characters there. All right, I'll pick a different one. My password has been reset. Yay. Now maybe I should put in that screen what the requirements are to make it easier to know. But it does route me back to the index page with an email equals, which then gets filled in. So that feature works on both pages. I guess I could log in as that user. That's interesting. It doesn't, yeah, it does, when it's automatically filled in like that, it doesn't handle the event properly. I have to add that to my list of bugs. Anyway, since I just made the login, I still remember what it is. Sure. So here I'm gonna have the next page is make new list. There's no other, I don't have a list of lists to look at yet, so you'd have to just create a new one. It's my only option on this page. Hopefully that's obvious enough. Maybe, I don't know if we need to say click here or something like that. Hopefully that's obvious enough. So demo list. And I have an option whether it's viewable or not and what the gift date is going to be. This I added in later. This was not part of the original spec. There's a number of things I've changed from the original spec that we reviewed. So I realize that for testing purposes and certain other situations, there may be scenarios where we may want to send out special messages, say, the day before the gift date or a week before or whatever, as reminders. I haven't built that feature yet, but I realize that I can't test it if it's always going to be December 25th. So it needs to be settable. And so let's make this November 25th, just for the fun of it. Okay, now once I have a demo list, I can choose it. I can delete it. That does work. I don't know if you want me to show you that, but it does work. And I can edit that list. Hey, what does that give me? Oh, maybe I don't want it to be the 25th. Maybe I want it to be the 24th. Okay, replace that. And so now I can go list the detail. That would be features from phase 4. Yeah, I think all this stuff here is phase 3. If I click here, you start to see other things. Ooh, that's phase 4. We're going to go cover that in the next video or something like that. All right, so let's just see how is this functionality built. We'll go look at the code. So if I look at my database calls, I have a list module. So for phase 4, I've got buyer loved. Do I want to talk about that now? Sure. I'll just mention, when I was thinking about the names, like, okay, the list on the left, the list of the people who are doing the buying, what are those people called? Well, I'm calling them the buyers. I don't know what the best word for that is, but we'll say they're the buyers. And what about the list on the right? Well, are they receivers? Yeah, I put them down as receivers, but at the time I was thinking, receivers? Who wants to call themselves a receiver? That's just such a horrible word. I was thinking, well, what are these people called? What do we usually call them in casual conversation? When on Christmas morning and someone receives a gift, what do you call them? Do you call them a receiver? No, you don't. What do you call them? I don't know. There was nothing ever came to mind. So the only thing I think of was loved ones. You don't call them really anything. They're just the people you love, and that's what you I don't know. So in the database design, go back in here. I have the user table. The tokens is for, I guess I have to show you that's part of the registration process. But there's the list, buyers, and then the loved, Okay, I guess it's corny. I never did come up with a great name. So it's kind of unfortunate that I just didn't like the word receiver. Plus the word receiver is hard to spell, right? Is it I before E except after C? Yeah, that's what it is, right? Loved is a lot easier to spell. So, okay. So it didn't really work out. End up with both because I couldn't get away from that. I just couldn't list loved out here because people would go, what? What are you talking about? So ended up with both. So that's all over the design. I don't know if I'll clean it up. I probably won't, but that's just some history. I'm sorry, that's really a tangent. We're not talking about registration anymore, are we? All right, but you saw what happens in the registration process. So back up here under DB calls. So now certainly we'll talk about the void list, the match list, and that stuff later, and the message queues, all this sort of stuff. This is all phase 5. But phase 3 would be this list page. And then we can go into 4 for buyer and loved. Okay, so list. So what do we need to do with lists? Well, we need to create them, right? We need to add them in. So there's the SQL for adding into the list table. It's pretty straightforward. I'm just calling a query. And here's the SQL, and you just fill in the values. You say, okay, well, that seems pretty easy. And when you're modifying, you're just updating the list. You're filling in all the information. When you're deleting, you're just, so here's one of my standards here is there is no such thing as deleting in the database. The Family Santa user doesn't have the permission to delete from the database. This is a nice security feature. So if anything gets hacked, or someone finds some sort of backdoor, they can't actually delete any information because I never gave that user the rights to delete anything from the database. So you can add things and you can modify things, but you can't actually delete them. So good luck with that. So the way you quote unquote delete is to set the is deleted bit to be 1. And when I say bit, I mean I found the hard way it's inadvisable that you not use the Boolean value in MySQL as a data type for the fields. You should use a tiny int, which is, I think, the same size of memory, and it has a number of 0 to 255. So just use 0 and 1 and call it a day. So the same sort of thing same as deleting, you have locked. You're set to is locked. Same sort of thing. What does it mean to have a locked list? That means you can't change it anymore. That happens later on the second page here, in this page here. All right. And also on the page that comes after that, the matching page, is messages sent. You want to know, did you actually send messages, or is it not too late? And you want to pull in one list. That's for the editing process. Do you want to pull in all your lists? That's for this demo list. And then there's a question of, is this list even mine? That question comes up quite a bit on the next page, because just because the interface is always locked to looking at my lists, there's nothing really saying that someone can't build a different client or start sending requests from some other sort of basically someone just create their own interface and start sending commands to the API, whether that be Insomnia or Postman or just their own curl request or something like that. I mean, I want to make sure there's security in the app, not just a good design in the app. You know what I'm saying? All right, so that's the list. This is the database calls for the list. Well, what calls these? Does this look secure? It does not. Not at all. So let's put another layer on that. What about the routes? So when someone wants to reach the API, let's go into the app and take a look at how that looks. We've looked at the app in the past, but now there's a lot more in there. Okay, so here's, look at all these routes. Okay, so yes, if someone goes API/list, it pulls up this API list module, and it's authenticated. So you have to be logged in for that to work. And API list is a route. Oh, yeah, over here, let's go look at the routes. Okay, so if you post to the route, remember we talked about how REST is representational state transfer. So CRUD values, create, read, update, and delete are converted into HTTP requests: post, get, put, patch, and delete. So put calls are replacements, and patch calls are altering part of the record. You can read up about that sort of stuff at in other places, but that's how you want to convert your calls, your SQL calls, into HTTP calls. So here I want to set the router to listen to a post request right at the API/list URL. Okay, so I'm grabbing the user. This is part of the authentication process on the login. It sticks that user ID into the data stream. This way we have that anytime we need it. And then I'm doing this safe text conversion here, so that anything that comes in, I'm making sure that it's not going to allow any SQL injection. So it takes out any characters that can be used for escaping SQL. Takes that out. It makes it a safe name. And same here for the gift date. Viewable, I don't care what you send me. I'm going to convert this to either a 1 or a 0. If it has a value, it's now 1. If it doesn't have a value, it's 0. So that's just a nice way to keep that safe. All right, so I don't really check that one. If you don't send me anything, then it's not viewable. No big deal. But if I don't get a name at all, I'm going to quick reply with, okay, that's a bad request. You didn't give me any names. And then if you didn't give me a valid date, I'm going to tell you, hey, it's a bad gift date. If you send me blank, that counts as a bad gift date, right? So we're going to be checking all these two to make sure that we have enough data to create the list properly. So I don't think we've discussed this at previous videos, but I have this somewhat arbitrary message format that I'm sending back all the time. I always say the status, and if it's something, so I'll scroll down a little bit. Success, there it is. Yes, so if you see success, that's obviously a good call. Everything else is a bad call of one sort or another. So this is just details, like an error message. And I have unique codes in here. So if someone says, hey, I was using your website and I got a list 101 error, what does that mean? You can read this text, missing name. It's right there. That should be clear enough. But if not, if someone, I want to have something that's a unique code that is only one place in all of the code base that has that particular error code. So I can look it up and find the exact place, the exact thing that went wrong, and find the exact point in the code where that happened. Got that from a friend of mine. I thought it was good advice, and I've been following it since then. So if you have all the fields you need, you're going to be doing a list.add, list being the name of this module, of course. Okay, so the call fails, return a code for that. If it just fails in general, it's a 500 series. The 500 series errors, I can't make them fail that way. I can't test that. But the 100 series calls I can test. So if I go into, oh, here it is, integration tests. All right, I got to go back up to the top here. API test, ping, incomplete, login. Good, ping. Oh, I didn't really show you the login process. I probably should describe that too. Just so I'm testing the password reset. I'm user get and search, replace missing first register. Okay, this is a bad call. I'm registering, but I'm missing a first name. Registering, I'm missing a last name. Registering, I'm missing email and phone. Register with a bad email, no phone, bad phone, with phone. That's good. Did I show? Yeah, I don't know if I showed a good one with email, but maybe it happens later. Here we go. List creation, but I'm missing a name. Oh, that's not going to work. Okay, a bad date. Okay, that's not. See here, we're looking for list 101 error. We're looking for list 102 error. There's the test for these. And then if it goes correct, then I'm saving this list ID because I'm using it in the modify, not mine. So what if I'm trying to modify someone else's list? Oh, that should be telling me, no, you can't modify those. Modifying something with a bad name, bad gift dates, modify the works good. List details. I'm going to be doing a get. I'll show you that in a minute. I'm just going to finish this tour through the testing cycle here. Check for details that are not mine. It'll say, nope, that's not yours. Details, list details, but a good call. List all of my calls. List all. Lock something that's not mine. Lock something that is good. Modify. This modify locked. Oh yes, I'm trying to modify, but it's already locked. That won't work, right? And delete something that's not mine. And I don't delete something that is mine here because I need this list to do other things in the test process. at the bottom of this file, I do delete the list and verify that that works. But if I deleted it here, I'd have no list to work with in my test suite. So I need to just leave that till later. Trust me, I do test that part. It's in here. All right. So back to the list route. Okay. So as I was saying before, if I'm posting, oh, yeah, this one's interesting. We'll come back to that one. Okay, so I'm getting a single ID. I'm sorry, putting a single ID. So this that means I'm replacing. Do I have a valid name and date? Check to make sure that it's mine, then modify it. Can I delete this? Is it mine? Delete it. Can I patch it? Meaning can I lock it? Check that it's mine, lock it. When I'm getting them, can I get all of them? Yes, I can. Because I'm doing this by user ID. I don't need to check that it's mine. I'm checking only the ones, I'm only returning the ones that are mine because I'm doing it by user ID. If I want to get just one, check that it's mine, get it. All right, back up to that one that was interesting. Where was it? Finalize. Okay, make sure that it's, we're only reducing it down to numbers. Nice safety feature. And make sure that there's actually a number that we can pull in. Check that it's mine, and then publish it. I'm not going to get into the, what publishing is. That will be covered at the end of the process when we're going to cover that chronological. So you can see, walking through this whole process, all the way to the end. This is the last step, but it's part of the list API, so that's why I'm covering it here. So you've seen what the back end does for the list, but what about the front end? So as you may recall, my model for making this app is there's an API, a REST API on the back end, and then there's HTML and JavaScript on the front end. Now, I don't think I've shown this. Maybe I have, but I'll re-show this. This is what I call the client API. I'm using Axios, and I have implemented an interceptor for Axios so that if I get any unauthorized requests coming through, I'm going to cycle back around and log out, basically. And you have to reject the promise. It's the Axios promise. Let's go take a look at so we're under www, and let's look at the authorization process. This is basically your login. Let me pull up the index page and show you that at the bottom of the index page, we're pulling in view, Axios, the API client, the main, and then the authorization process. And I just throw in this limit choices, which I'll show you that when I go through the front end of this interface. But the point is that authorization happens after these other files are already loaded. So it runs that code after the other code has been cached. So what code is being run? Well, so it first defines some things. It says, okay, which page is your login URL? We need the ability to store tokens, get tokens, store IDs, get IDs. We need the ability to log out, show our private information after you're logged in. We need a login process. We need to redirect to the login page. And then we've got this section here, which is what is actually run. Notice how there's here it says define a function. This is not defined. This part here is not defining a function. It is the code. And so first it says, okay, grab the token. It's run this procedure, this function here, run the get token function, pull back the token. Okay, for you to understand that, I'll go back up and we'll take a look at the token stuff. If I'm storing the token, I'm going to window local storage and I'm setting a JWT and I'm adding in this token. Token is what's passed into this function. If I'm getting the token, I'm going back into this local storage get item, pulling the JWT into this value. If it's undefined, then call it blank. Otherwise, I'm going to return the value. There's probably a faster way to say that, but I like clarity in my code rather than conciseness. Okay, so back down here, grabbing the token, and I'm just logging to the console. Okay, I'm about to verify this thing. I'm going to send a ping to the API. It's one of the functions we looked at. I think it was part of the first video, that base code. It says, okay, if I get something back from the ping, do I get an okay back from the ping? If I'm not getting the data or I'm not getting an okay, we're going to call this a bad response. I'm going to clear out my token because apparently my token's no good. And then I'm going to go navigate to the login page, which is, we're going to say if we don't have the login URL as part of my URL, then I'm going to switch that current location to that login URL. If, however, it's not bad, then it's good. I'm going to store the user ID, my store ID, and then I'm going to switch over to showing the private information on the page. This is if the token was good. You did a ping and it was a good ping. If it's bad, you get an error of some sort, then it's a bad token. You're clearing it and you're reloading the page. If you go up here and there's no token, well, then I just say, hey, there's no token, so go to the login page and log in. Now, I'm saying go to the login page because you could be on any page that's calling this auth.js. You may not be on the login page. So here it checks if you are on the login page or not. If you're not, you need to migrate over there so that you can go through this process correctly. All right, it's a little bit involved. So we do a reload. What this does is it says, okay, we're going to go back through the code from the beginning, go back and get the token and go through this process, do another ping, etc., etc. So it goes around and around until it does work. So when there is no token and you're not going to get a token, that means you haven't logged in yet, and you're going to be sitting, and the only way you can get into that state is if you are already on the login page. And so we'll wait for a login process. The login process is defined up here. Here it is. You're passing an email, phone, password. So you're going to call API login. And if it's correct, you're going to get back a JWT in the data. Then you're going to store that token and then go back and reload the page so that you execute this script down here, which then does a ping and make sure that you really are logged in. It does a verification of your login at least once after you've logged in, so that we know that the token actually is working. So you say, wait, how is all this happening? Well, that's over here in your API client. Because what it does is when you reload the page, this API client reloads this JWT from local storage, calls it a token, puts it in this header, authorization bearer token, call this config, and anything that needs to be called with authorization will have this config at the bottom. So ping is one of those things. Do a get, ping, send to authorization with the header. See that there? This popped up. Config, headers, authorization, and then so that verifies that this is correct. All right. So now we've gone through the login process or the authorization process. We'll take a look at the list stuff. We were talking about the list. We can create a list, lock a list, replace a list, delete a list, get a list, and get all the lists. Those are the things that this is just the client side of what we were looking at for all those routes. Back to this page, I've got API client, main, auth, and limit choices. All right, let's take a look at main. We've looked at API client, we looked at auth. We know what Vue and Axios are. If not, please look them up. I'm not going to cover those. Maybe so that isn't too much of a distraction, I'll talk about limit choice because it's really small. Let me just cover that real quick. All this is doing is saying, okay, we're going to find the email and the phone on the page. That's just for registration or for login. Say if, and we're going to set up an event listener that says every time you lift up the key, we're going to check to see if there's any characters in that field. If there is, we're going to hide the opposite one. So basically, if you're typing in an email, we're going to hide the phone. If you're typing in the phone, we're going to hide the email. If you go back to 0 characters, you're back to start again. So it is reversible. So we're adding and removing this hide me class, which we use all over the place, just for hiding any items. I think it sets display equal to none in the CSS. And because you can't have items with the same name on 2 different forms, so the login form and the registration form are 2 different forms. So we got email 2 and phone 2. This one's for the registration process, whereas this one up here is for the login process. So this one page takes care of both scenarios. All right, we got that out of the way. Let's take a look at the main function. Okay, this is kind of a big file here. Let's see how big it is. It is 300 lines, a little bit more. Okay, so what does this do? Well, we'll just look at it from the beginning here. Okay, we've got a reset function. Yes, that's for a password reset process. It removes the hide me from the login and adds the hide me to the chooser. Perhaps it's better just to take a look at the HTML first. Sorry. Take a look at the HTML, what we've got in here. All on one page. You could argue maybe this should have been split up a bit, but I kind of got carried away, so that all ended up on one page. So here's the sign-in form. Overall, the container for your Vue.js container. Okay, here's the login form. It's just a div for the login. Sign in, they call it. Okay. Email, phone, password. There's a button for sign in and a link to say, if you don't know your password, click here. That sends you over to this reset function, which I'll show you all the functions in a bit. Try me, just registration. It just says give it a try. There's nothing really, it's just one little box for showing that. If you recall what that looks like, yeah, we showed that earlier. It's just a box that has a give it a try button on it. And this try new function gets called. Here's the registration form. Basically, when you click this try new, this registration form shows up and this one goes away. I'll show you that in a bit. Email, phone. Remember the limit choice shows only one or the other. And actually, since we went through this, you remember that we had this checkbox agree that you had to check if you were going to sign up with your phone number. And then at the end is a list. That's this up here. That's this form right here. The list has a button at the top for making a new list. There's a list of your lists, which using the v-for idiom from Vue.js, it says pull from my lists a list of objects, and we're going to bind the value to the index of that object. We're going to cycle through the name of each of these lists. And assuming that there's some length to show, then we're going to say click the list to manage it. That's this here, right here. So if there's actually something on the list, we're going to say, hey, please click to manage it. Of course, we also say that same thing. If there's a length, then we show the your lists up here as well. Then there's a delete, an edit, and a manage button. And they just click these functions: delete list, edit list, manage list. Okay, then we're clearing HTML, and then there's a modal. Remember when we click on edit here, this modal comes up. That modal is this form here. There's a modal header, and then a modal called replace. Is viewable, gift date. So the way this is filled in, it just says hard-coded 2023 and 2024 for year. Month is just 1 through 12. It's a for list through a fixed array. I just hard-coded the array right in there. And then the same thing for the day, hard-coded out through 31. I wasn't going to go through, I've done it before, but I don't want to do it again. Going through the logic of whether displaying 28, 30, or 31, depending on, have it interactive. So depending on which month you choose, determines what the value for the dropdown is. I'm not doing that. If you put in the wrong date, it just complains. It says, hey, you put in a bad date. Try again. So I gave people enough rope to hang themselves, but I just wasn't going to build in the logic back and forth for that date. Now, I hear some people already saying, oh, there's a widget. You can just, call that thing and include it in with your code. I'm not into that. I guess I'm into old-fashioned coding. I'm not pulling in widgets from other people. I'm just building it myself. And fine. So I take longer than other people, but at least I know the code and I know what's going on. I'm not surprised by anything. I don't have to upgrade it when someone changes it. It's all my code. All right, enough of that. Button execute. Oh yeah, this is just a general, this modal is a general form I've copied from some other place. So in here is the custom code, but here is the generic code. It just says, click whatever you call this. It just says execute. This is your button text. It's brought in by the code, and it's just as button push, whatever that is. So it's generic. You can have this do various things. Okay, how does that work? Let's show that. Back to your main. So remember I mentioned the login form. This is the login process. Okay, grab the button. When you click on the login button, it puts it into in process, meaning this class grays out the button. You may have noticed that. I'm just grabbing email, phone, password, making sure they actually have values, and then going through the auth login process. Registration is very similar. Grab the various values here. If phone is there, but you haven't agreed, you're going to pop up an alert. Hey, you got to click the agree. Otherwise, you're going to do click the register button to be in process. Now we're going to register first, last, email, phone. Let's see what we get back. If we get a success, hey, we're good. We'll say our verification email was sent out. Please verify your contact within the next 15 minutes. That's what we saw. Otherwise, I say, hey, there was a problem with the registration. For whatever reason, something didn't go correctly. So you'd have to handle that. And if there's some other kind of more fundamental error on the client side, we get this error. All right. MO stands for modal. So this is all the information we need to handle the data that's in the modal. All right, so we have a modal wrapper. The button text, like what gets displayed there. The guest function is the one that's passed in. I'll just show you. That's just where we put the data for the modal, okay? In process, I talked about, that's the one that changes it, adds that class for in process. Show modal, that's the main function for this section here. It's what div is being operated on, what's the button text called, and what function are you going to call when you click that button. That the function's actually passed in as a variable. In this case, we call it the magic list, meaning which list is it from here. In this case, there's only one, but I mean, if there's a whole list of lists, you need to make sure you pick the right one. And so whichever one you picked is the one that gets copied in here into your magic list. And so we're going to get the year, month, and day from the gift date. You have to separate that out so it shows up so the drop down shows the correct date. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I'm saying that too fast. So you grab the year, from this gift date substring is the first 4 characters of the date string, right? The date string is YYYY-MM-DD. M being month, D being day, Y being year, of course. So you get to the first 4 characters of your date. You put that into this variable. You're going to get the 5th and 6th characters. Because the dates are, any single digits are 1 character, whereas the date format has a 0 padding up front. So I have to convert that to a number that doesn't have 0 padding up front. And the way you do that is you subtract 0. That forces it to become a number. If you add 0, it actually appends the character 0 on the end of your number. Whereas if you subtract 0, that's not ambiguous. It's clearly a mathematical operation. It can't be a string. So in JavaScript, when you're adding 2 things, the data type of the first one is what rules. So this starts as a string. So when you say I want to add, that means it's going to, the plus operator is going to concatenate, because you start with the string and say, okay, string plus meaning concatenate, and the 0 gets converted into the string of 0 and concatenated on. Whereas if you say minus, you're clearly not doing a concatenation. There's no string operation that supports a minus operation. So it says, oh, I'm going to go back, convert this string into a number, and then subtract 0 from it. So you end up with just the number here, which means you don't have any 0 padding. Kind of a long explanation, sorry, but so I got to do that for month and day. And maybe you would say, oh, there's a nice function that does that for me. Okay, fine. You use your function. I'm going to use this. Maybe there's some efficiency reasons why this is bad, but that's what I've gotten used to over the years, how you convert strings to numbers in JavaScript. All right, so then I'm going to set everything up. You can read this on your own time. So if I want to hide the modal, I'm basically just setting the display to none. And if I'm doing a button push, change the text to wait, display none, and call the function, the guest function that was passed in. And you say, what is this new gift date? Because you need to pull this back at the end of the process, I need to have a computed function that's always calculating what is my new date. So it's adding on, if it's less than 2 digits, I prepend the 0 back on. So I get month, day, and year, and I put the dashes in at the end. So that's the modal. That's handling everything from the modal. Now here's the main page, Vue.js. I've got a user ID that comes in. I have a list of lists. So there's the login process. It just goes into the main area and calls login. I think we looked at that earlier. Let's see, scroll back up. Yeah, that's it here. Main.login. There's main.logout as well, and main authenticated. So once you're logged in, it does this VM startup, hides the login form, hides the try form, hides the chooser div. Chooser div is list. Okay, yeah. Oh, removes the list. Yeah, so your list gets unhidden. So you get to see that now. Yes. So we're done with logging in. We're done with registering, and you get to see your lists. Reset, we talked about. Register, we talked about. Startup, that's the thing we're just saying we're going to call. So what does that do? It gets the profile. It says, okay, grab me, since I have a user ID that I got from my login process, I'm going to pull back that profile information so I have that handy. And then I'm going to go get my lists. This is saying that, remember the try new function? When you click that, you're basically going to hide the login div, we're going to hide the try div, and we're going to unhide the registration. When you're getting all the lists, you're basically doing API get list all. We talked about that earlier. And then we're going to take that data that comes back and we put it into my lists. When you're adding a list, you're going to show the modal list add. So remember, it says what is the name of your div? It's called list. What text do you want to have on that modal button? The word is add. And what function do you want to pass in? It's this one. So it says call the in process. We talked about that earlier. And then we're going to do API create list, and we're going to send in the name, the viewability, and the gift date. And then we're going to hide our modal, and we're going to go back and get list, meaning we're going to refresh that list of lists so that it has the new one on the list. If there's any errors, we're going to also hide the modal. Be done with it either way. All right. For editing the list, very similar sort of thing, except we're going to pull up the list, and this time we're going to call it replace instead of add. And we do something different. We replace the list, and then we go back and refresh our get lists again. If we're deleting the list, it just deletes it. There's no modal for that process. You just send in the list ID and then refresh. If we're managing the lists, we're going to check and see, has it already been locked? If it has, we're going to show the match page. If it has not been locked yet, then we're going to show the list page. And we'll show that probably in the next video because this one's getting kind of long. And then what does it do on mounting? I don't remember very much of this. Okay, this is saying we're going to enable the viewing of these buttons if it's appropriate to show these buttons over here, 1, 2, 3. If there's a list of lists, then we can have these buttons showing. Okay, let's take a look at the API public file, that module that handles most of the things that are public. If you look at the routes, most of these are behind the login. You have to be registered. You have to be authenticated to get to any of these routes. The only exception is public, health, and unsubscribe. Of course, you want to be able to unsubscribe without being logged in. The same thing goes for the public routes. So what are the public routes? So the login route, we need to check. If we don't have either email or phone, then that's an error. Say, okay, we need to have at least one of those two to register. And if you don't have a password, same thing. Did I say register? I meant login. You need to have one of these two to log in, and you need to have a password to log in. So we're going to get that user by the email or phone. Here are those two fields. We're looking for either one. It works both ways. If it's there, we're going to generate a hash off of the password and the salt, and we're going to pull in the hashed password we already have. So if the hash equals the hashed password, and we're not in some sort of bypass, which is a software setting we can do just to make it so it always logs in. But so if the hash we just calculated matches the one that's been stored, that means that we've logged in. Gee, you want to go into this little side here, the side conversation. So the way you want to store your passwords and logins, you're going to have, in the database, you're going to have the hash of your password, and you're going to have the salt of that hash. You're not going to store the password in the database. Okay, that would be insecure. So when someone types in their password, you're going to take what they typed in, which is not being stored anywhere, it's just being passed into this function, and you're going to take it, you're going to generate a hash the same way you did when you stored their their password when they first registered, you're going to generate that hash, and you're going to use the salt that's in the database, and you can come up with the hash that if they put in the correct password with that correct salt, it will give you this hash, which is the one that's stored in the database. So it's a one-way process that you pass in these two values, you get this value out. And that's the value that's in the database. If you put in the wrong password, you're not going to guess any combination of wrong passwords that will give you the same hash. Anyway, maybe that wasn't very well explained, but so what we're going to do is we're going to take that user ID and the email address, and we're going to assign that into our JWT token. And we're going to pass that token back. So if you go look at the token that's passed into the browser, you'll see the user ID and the email address in there. If that doesn't work out, then I log, hey, so-and-so is trying to break in, or just whatever, got the wrong password for whatever reason. It's just good to log these things. If you see too many of them for the same email address, maybe we should look into that. All right, the registration process, you have to make sure you have a first name and a last name. You got to have either an email or phone, otherwise there's an error. If you do pass in an email, it had better be a valid email. If you pass in a phone, it better be a valid phone. There's algorithms for this. There's a test routine to make sure we know what valid is. Okay, then we're going to create a user, and we're going to send remember, a registration, you don't set your password yet. You just go through the password reset process. So I'm going into password reset request process, and I'm asking for a password reset for email and phone. And it's going to send out a request. Same thing if I go in through the request for a password reset. Password reset was started by this person. We're going to send that same, call that same function here, the password reset function. And if you're coming back from the password reset, you have your code, you're ready to go. So you're going to say, here we go, the password reset is now being attempted. We're checking to make sure that the password isn't too weak. We saw that earlier where it was too weak. You make sure that the number of, here's a 15-minute delay right there. You want to make sure the number of milliseconds has not passed from the time that was created. So you read in your token from email, phone, and code. If you passed in the right code and you've got either phone or email that matches, then you'll get the correct token. Yes, if that doesn't match, you say, no, that's invalid. Otherwise, you're checking the one that comes back. You check the time, and you say, has it been more than 15 minutes? And if it has, you just say, okay, you got the right code, but it's too late. And if it's something else, I'm sorry, that's one error, and this is the second error. If you got everything correct, then we're going to generate a salt to the crypto function. We're going to generate a hash with the password the new password you chose. We just generated the salt. Put that in here. We get a hash. We're going to save that hash, put the user ID into the user function. Basically resetting that user, making sure that that's correct. Status success. And then again, part of this API public here, this public section of our API, is we're going to say anything that falls through everything else is going to catch this router all. And we're going to capture the path, and we're going to say that's called our method, and the verb is the HTTP method that we used. That means it's going to be either post or get or put, patch, or delete. And so then we're going to have this general message here. Hey, unknown API was called using this verb, and the path being called is this. And it just say, hey, this is not implemented. It just sends it back. So